I'm sorry, I tried. Don't run yet, don't run yet. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is me, yours truly, Dr. Shingima Vima. And today I'm talking about a topic that I've thoroughly enjoyed sort of observing. I wasn't actually going to do this video for two reasons. The first one is I just wanted to enjoy the beautiful game, you know, just for the sake of enjoying it, enjoying a good old tournament like it's 1994 and I'm watching the World Cup again. The second reason is that I've also done a few soccer slash football videos on this channel of late, and I would hate for it to devolve into just being something that focuses on overwhelmingly on one of my passions. I've done the Lumumba Vea video, which was the most recent one up until now. That's not purely a soccer video. I was talking about the fan who stood statuesque as Lumumba at the African Cup of Nations, and of course I go into talking a little bit about who Lumumba himself was. I did a quick profile of Cape Verde, who'll be making their debut at the World Cup this year. Again, it didn't focus so much on the football. It focused on the national identity of Cabo Verde. I did we put up a clip, a 10-minute video of that talked about the 1974 World Cup and Zaire's perceived awkward moment in that tournament. So indeed, I've done a few of those, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this, but a friend of mine, shout out Munya, did ask me if I was going to do one of these, and that's something that might be of interest to people. So I decided I was going to go ahead and do that. So I'm talking today about the African Cup of Nations, the recently concluded African Cup of Nations, which was held in Morocco. And we'll talk about Morocco as well. That's why I'm dressed in my Zimbabwean shirt. Zimbabwe was out there. We'll talk about them as well in this. But I'm wearing a cricket shirt just because I don't have a Zimbabwean warrior soccer shirt right now. So if anybody has a link to that and is listening right now, I'll be glad to, I'm due a present. But anyway, we're repping the Zimbabwe today. So we'll talk a little about that. And the way I formatted this so that it stays true to our to the Pan-African element of this conversation, to the nexus of popular culture, which in this case is sport, football, and geopolitics and other social, political, socio-economic considerations. So I'll try play it that way. And the way I've organized this, the best way I thought I would have this organized, this conversation is my top 10 significant or top 10 noteworthy moments from this African Cup of Nations. And what I did was I've listed them 10 to 1. In what I've tried to rank them in terms of like importance, but if it's not perfect, what I can definitely say is that if you want to look at it another way, if you don't want to agonize over the ranking of all 10 of them, think the first 5 being the lighter, than the next 5 being the heavier topics. But the 5 and 5 could be in any order, if that makes sense. So yeah, so if you remember cassettes, think of the first part I'm gonna do as being the B side, then we get to the A side. Indeed. So what are we talking about? The African Cup of Nations was held in Morocco this year. It was the 35th edition of this tournament. 35th edition. The first one was held in 1957, if I remember correctly. I mean, the tournament started then. So this was the 35th edition. 1957, that's even before the first official Euros, which started in the 1960s in Oceania and North America, right? CONCACAF. Those are far more recent than that. The only ones that predated CONMEBOL, South America, which was doing this since 1916. Then immediately before the Afcon, the Asian AFC did their tournament, which was hosted surprisingly by Hong Kong. Again, the British centrism is very apparent there too. So, all right, so let's get going with this video, man. We're already 8 minutes in or something. So I'll start with some honorable or some mentions. Real quick, the fact that among the honorable mentions, the fact that Nigeria and Cameroon are not going to the World Cup. But not only were they in, they played pretty admirably. Both made it to the quarterfinals, and Nigeria, even though they lost they lost in the semifinals. Many people actually thought that they played the best football in the tournament, and as these things go, they ended up losing, of course, to Morocco, who were the hosts, and lost narrowly as well. So once you get to the semifinals, it really, unless you get blown out like Brazil did against Germany in 2014, it really could go anyway. So Nigeria was in there and Cameroon were in there. But they're not going to the World Cup. You know who's going to the World Cup, though? Ghana. And Ghana was nowhere to be seen if it was not in, which brings us to the next point pretty well. Ghana wasn't in, and Cape Verde, which is also going to the World Cup, was not in. But Cape Verde is a far smaller nation. They are making it to the World Cup for the first time. Them not making it to every tournament is a little bit less surprising. But to tell me that Ghana was not one of the 24 teams, right? That's almost half the teams on the continent that qualified, and yet they're off to the World Cup. Crazy. And to think that Nigeria and Cameroon, neither of them were among the possibly 10 African countries that will be going to the World Cup is crazy. But that brings us to the next honorable point I wanna comment on here, and that's the issue of rivalries. There were so many rivalries that played out. I didn't want to bring this as one of the 10. Initially, I put it as one of the 10, but it's football, So what are some of these rivalries that showed, nearest and dearest to me was Zimbabwe versus South Africa, which was the last group game in their group. Where South Africa, of course, would go on to progress, but Zimbabwe won that game. If they had even drawn, I think there was conversation about them possibly qualifying. But we'll talk a lot more about that. It's one of the 10, actually. But the Zim versus SA rivalry played out. Those are the two former settler colonies in Southern Africa. They are neighbors. Culturally, there's some exchange with the Ndebele people having come up from Zululand to becoming a very dominant significant community in Zimbabwe, in modern day Zimbabwe. This is in pre-colonial era, but also the modern day reality that Zimbabweans far and away make up the largest immigrant group in South Africa to this day. And while many are loved in many places, there's also real issues of xenophobia, what's been termed Afrophobia, a lot of it targeted towards Zimbabwe. So that was an interesting narrative. We'll talk a little more about it. Tunisia played Algeria. That's a very big game. Egypt versus Senegal in the semis. That one, we can call it the Liverpool Legends Derby. For a long time, the feared strike force of Liverpool in the late 2010s to the early 2020s was Sadio Mane of Senegal and Mohamed Salah of Egypt, both who are in the conversation about being the GOATs of their countries. I think in Salah's case, it's pretty much sealed. Mane may have a bit more competition with the likes of El Hadji Diouf, but even he, by now, I think he's surpassed him, especially after this Afcon. Even then, when they play together, there was often some tension between them, so it manifests in this game. But it seemed to be all love. And also, interestingly, Sadio Mane Senegal seems to have the number on Salah, despite Salah being the better player in consensus. Not by much, but better for sure. But just Senegal's team is pretty stacked. Egypt is really just Salah, then maybe one or two other cats. Egypt versus Cote d'Ivoire is the most played match in African history. Has now been played 12 times, I believe. That was the quarterfinal match that Egypt would go on to win against. Egypt is also the country that holds the most championships. Cote d'Ivoire is the holders. Algeria versus Nigeria is not a classic rivalry per se, but it's growing, right? And the quote that I saw here said, a classic African rivalry is renewed under the Marrakesh lights as Algeria and Nigeria clash in what many consider the standout quarterfinal of Afcon 2025. Both sides have arrived unbeaten, have won all 4 of their matches, and harbor realistic ambitions of lifting the trophy. Neither of them would lift the trophy, neither of them would be in the final, but that is the level of rivalry that's happening here. And another thing that you will start to see play out as well as Egypt, Senegal, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, Algeria, Nigeria is also some North African, West African rivalry developing. But we'll talk a little more about that. Now, to my 10 points, guys. You guys have waited long enough to hear this. Let me get to my 10. Number 10, big names showed up at the tournament. Number 10, big names showed up at the tournament. In February 2025, while discussing Mohamed Salah's Ballon d'Or chances on Sky Sports, Jamie Carragher, right, famed from the 2000s, famous English defender who played for Liverpool and is now a pundit, appeared to dismiss the African Cup of Nations as not a major tournament. He was to which many pundits and former players, British and otherwise, including the great Mika Richards, who is on the show with Carragher, Daniel Sturridge, Rio Ferdinand, all of them pushed back, and other people, Didier Drogba and other African players as well. But I just picked a few of the British cats here who pushed back. Earlier in 2021, Liverpool manager at the time, Jurgen Klopp, had referred to the African Cup of Nations as a little tournament during a press conference when he was talking about the fact that he was going to be losing Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane, and Naby Keita, who plays for Guinea. Exact words were something like, in January, there's a little tournament in Africa. Later on, though, Klopp would explain that, he's German, you see. And he was saying, like, I was doing a sort of sarcastic English joke. There's this small issue of, when you actually mean a big thing, that's kind of what he was implying. But you can appreciate people having their defenses up right away because of the way in which the tournament has been viewed in the past. This tournament, the fact that it's gaining resonance, and in fact, this 35th one is probably the best of all time in terms of how it was, the hosting of it. There were still some technicalities that we're going to talk about. But, you saw so many big names show up there. You had the great Zinedine Zidane, right? The French player Zinedine Zidane, World Cup winner, was there to support, interestingly, his son, Luka Zidane, who is now the Algerian goalkeeper. Zidane himself is of Algerian descent, but he's French and is, again, one of the greatest players of all time. So just to see him at the tournament, watching his son playing this in Afcon was beautiful. Kylian Mbappe, arguably the greatest player in the world right now, one of them for sure, was there to see his French as well. So there's a trend. He was there to see his good friend Achraf Hakimi, who leads the Morocco team. Chouameni and Kounde, two other French players. Dang! See, the French boys are coming home. They were also there watching the games. But outside of them, you have the likes of Akon was there, right? Davido showed up. Idris Elba was there. So many big names. One of the bigger names that I there was a funny video of the CAF president talking about Burna Boy being stuck at the airport because he had all this gold and the TSA didn't know what to do with him, looking like a modern day Mansa Musa at the airport. But also, big dog, the young man Aisho Speed, who's on it here right now. He was on a fantastic tour of Africa. He just finished it, but he concluded it by being revealed as the mascot, the lion, out in they're called the Atlas Lions, right? So, Morocco, that's the nickname. So to have him be the lion, and he reveals himself and does his backflips. Fantastic moment, synergy of the sort of streaming Gen Z culture, right? And the beautiful game and the people of the continent. So that was my number 10 moment. Number 9, I'm getting a little more, this may not mean a lot to most people because Zimbabwe was eliminated in the first round and really isn't one of the great soccer nations, despite, the likes of Peter Ndlovu and Bruce Grobela. We're proud of it, right? So this moment, number 9, Nakamba's not so marvelous moment. Since Zimbabwe made its first appearance at the Afcon back in 2004, their record has always been either A, we mess up the first two games, or we struggle through the first two games, then beat a giant in the third. So either that or we royally flub up. We never make it out of the group stages. It's always a false dawn with that. And before some big-hearted person says, well, for a team that's only been there a handful of times, beginning as recently as 2004, they're still learning to the rope. No, stop it. Madagascar qualified once in 2019, made it to the quarterfinals. Malawi, who many Zimbabweans look at as little bro a little bit, shout out to the Flames, has been there 3 times and made it to the second round as recently as 2021. Cabo Verde has only been there 4 times, beginning in 2013, and of those 4, they've made it to the quarterfinals twice and to the round of 16 once. Similarly, Equatorial Guinea, just 5 times, all of them coming after from 2012 onwards, and they've made it to the semis 1 year and quarterfinals in 2 other years, so no excuses. But anyway, this time, we lost 2-1 to Egypt in the first game. No shame on paper, what with Salah, Mamouche, and the fact that they made it to the semifinals eventually. But it was still winnable if you watched it. We actually led for a long time 1-0. Then we drew 1-1 with Angola. That game, it wasn't great. Then the last great group game was against South Africa, who, if you remember what I was saying earlier, is already one of our neighbors, right? So that's a rivalry, a derby sort of rivalry. South Africa is a giant, maybe not on the same level of consistency as the West African or North African giants, but when they are good, they are really good. I would argue that outside of West and North Africa, they are probably the best team. So the game's going on. It's 2-2 at this point. We'll fast track to that. Our youngin, Tawana Maswani of Motherwell in Scotland, has been playing his butt off. He's scored 1. He's created the second. It's 2-2. If Zim wins, we are through for sure. If we hold the draw, we may still make it as one of the best third-placed teams. 80th minute. South African player hits a shot that was going off target. I was only half paying attention at this point. Slightly. But it was off target. In a foolhardy move that had people scratching their heads, calling for the captain's head, and petitioning FIFA to investigate, Marvelous Nakamba, our vastly experienced captain, playing in the English Premiership for years, as recently as last year, playing for Luton. He's played for Aston Villa. He played for Bruges. This is, and also he just comes across as a very sober presence, which is why he's the captain. He dove to the left, goalie style, and palmed the ball out, resulting in a penalty. 80th minute. Kids have been playing their butts off to make it here, and you, as the most senior player, do something that baffling. The only way he doesn't get the attention that other moments we're going to talk about later is because it was in the first round and just sort of, But if this had happened, and then, in the knockout stages, seriously, we're not new to failure at this stage, but those levels of self-infliction are hard to wrap your head around. And by the way, I saw some Zimbabweans talking about petitioning FIFA to and even suggested that FIFA was looking into match fixing here. I know we are hurt, but if you really thought that FIFA was going to pop out to try and investigate this with the, nah, man, it's some nonsense that happened, but it happened. Indeed. That was my number 9 moment. Number 8, the quarterfinals being predictable as hell. So you might think this is not even interesting, but in fact, I would say the tournament, this is a comment I made in the Lumumba Vea video at the beginning. I'd say the tournament, as far as the results go, was pretty predictable. There were 7, possibly 8, out of 9, possibly 10 teams going to the World Cup at the tournament. I say that because the Congo was there, but it's in the playoffs. So 7 of the 9 teams that have qualified for sure, with the exception of Ghana and Cabo Verde were at the tournament, and the Congo as well. So all 8 of those teams made it to the last 16. So no surprises that the World Cup bound teams all made it to the second round. Every North African team in the group, in the tournament, made it to the second round, going back to the era of of North African dominance in the early years of the tournament. Every West African team except for one, which we'll talk about later, made it to the second round. So that's the Senegals, the Cote d'Ivoires, the Benins, you name them, the Mali, the Burkina Faso, all of them were there. South and East Africa, pretty pathetic, with the only exception, I think not Ghana, Uganda, and what am I talking about? Not Uganda. Definitely no East African countries. But Mozambique and South Africa made it to the, and South Africa competed, but even Mozambique was knocked out 3-0 with a whimper. Once we got to the quarterfinals, all the games were, pretty competitive. But no big injustices, at least on paper. There's some injustices we'll talk about with the reffing and how the tournament went. But on paper, none of those results would you look at and say, like, oh, I can't believe that happened. Every last one of those results, they were close games, right? The 1-0s, the 2-0s, deciding these games. Egypt against Senegal. Some people thought Egypt might have that number just based on their pedigree in the tournament. But really, like I said, it's Salah and Mamouche. Then once you say those names, you're struggling to think of who else is there. Whereas with Senegal, we can talk about Kalidou Koulibaly, who was their captain. You can talk about Sadio Mane, who's one of the goats of African soccer. You can talk about Edouard Mendy, who was not too long ago one of the 10 best goalkeepers in the world, right? Champions League winning keeper. You can say, just a bunch of these youngins who play for teams like Lyon, like Everton, right? Ballers. So, now to be clear, while big teams always do big team things, there's often some disruption. Zambia won the whole tournament back in 2012. I've already spoken here about teams like Cabo Verde and Equatorial Guinea doing their things. But this year, it just seemed to be a clean separation on the sheep and goats. Moment number 7. Let's cook. This is the one West African team that didn't qualify to the second round, and this became an issue. Gabon. Gabon's African Cup of Nations campaign was far more than just bad results. It turned into a full-on football controversy and political drama. Now, the Panthers lost all 3 group games. They were leading 2-0 against Cote d'Ivoire, and they blew that lead to lose 3-2 to finish bottom of Group F. Now, remember, Gabon, you may think of them as like you never heard of them, right? But Gabon was one of the teams that was in the playoffs to make it to the final playoffs to make it to the World Cup. This was a team that had been on the verge of making it to the World Cup, right? So for them to go out with such a whimper, it was pretty pathetic. That miserable showing prompted Gabon's sports minister to publicly suspend the national team, fire the coach, dissolve the technical staff, and ban key veterans like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Oh my God, you ban Aubameyang? The second greatest player ever out of Gabon is not fit to lace Aubameyang's boots. He is still doing it right now. He's in the Champions League playing with Marseille. He top scored in the Bundesliga in Germany and in England with Arsenal. So this reaction was framed as defending national values after a dishonorable performance. Some countries take that seriously. The suspension, however, was short-lived. It was officially announced on January 2026, right, on New Year. What a way to start the year. And lifted 11 to 12 days later when the Gabonese Football Federation said the government measures suspending the team and excluding players were revoked on January 12, 13. This came because there was a cabinet shuffle and a new sports minister came in who approached this with a little more level head. I put this together with number 7 because even though it's not to the same level, it's another West African spat, but this was from the far more colorful and far more successful, at least as far as this tournament goes, Nigeria, which was a splat between 2 of their biggest players. During Nigeria's 4-0 Afcon round of 16 win over Mozambique, a tense moment between Victor Osimhen, right, who plays for Galatasaray right now, but really could play for a far bigger team in Western Europe. With all due respect to Gala, he really could be playing for Chelsea right now. I think, like, if he was, dare I say it? Should I say it as an Arsenal fan? I think he was better than Victor Gyökeres, who we got. Battle of the Victors. Who's going to win? Either way, they are both victors. Ha ha ha. Now, so a tense moment happened within Victor Osimhen, right? The great Victor Osimhen, who also won the Serie A title with Napoli just a couple years ago. And Ademola Lookman, who is also on it here, he scored 3 goals. He scored a hat-trick in the Europa Cup final 2 seasons ago. So these are both titans of in Nigeria right now. But the tense moment between them grabbed more headlines than the scoreline. With Nigeria already cruising, I think they were 3-0 up at this point. Osimhen wanted the ball in a promising attack but didn't get it, prompting him to angrily confront Lookman on the pitch around the 63rd minute. This sparked a verbal altercation so intense that Wilfred Ndidi, their captain, and even a Mozambique defender, Reinaldo Mandawa, had to physically intervene if your ops ever have to come in to stop you from fighting. Shame on you. Especially since they're already like 3-0 down. Calvin Bassey also jumped into the fray as peacemaker, right? Osimhen then gestures to be substituted and was taken off, later skipping the customary post-match huddle and heading straight to the dressing room. Fans booed him despite the fact that he had scored 2 of the 4 goals. Lookman played down the incident after the match, calling it just football, and insisted there were no lingering issues. The coach, Sunday Olise, would come out and say later that this had disrupted team chemistry and drained the psychological edge required to win Afcon. This is after they'd gotten eliminated. Because they didn't get eliminated in that game. That was in the round of 16. They made it all the way to the semi-finals where they lost to Morocco narrowly. But the coach, Sunday Olise, who's a great player from the 90s, would say if that hadn't happened, that drained something. And maybe he is right. But they also made it pretty far and lost to Morocco, which is the highest ranked team in Africa right now at number 8. They were the hosts. So no shame in that. But maybe there is something to that. Number 6. Interesting here. There's a trend, which is to say, incredibly so, this tournament had so many foreign-born kids who were not born in Africa playing in the tournament, right? These are the diaspora kids. This trend has been facilitated by a change to FIFA eligibility rules, which was introduced more than 2 decades ago, right? So more than 2 decades ago, this was introduced. But as people are starting to catch on to that, and also as globalization means more people are traveling and being born in these different places, that means that combined with the change in rules means that the kids who were born after that rule was made are now coming of age. But also other players who with fewer than 3 senior caps before the age of 21 are allowed to switch national allegiance. As a result of this, France has emerged as the primary cradle of talent for African football. Listen, 30% of all tournament players, 30% were born outside of Africa. The Comoros, 96% of its players were born outside of Africa. So that must mean just one guy outside of the Comoros. So that must mean just one guy was born on the island of the Comoros. But that's an island nation and it's tiny, so that kind of makes sense. DRC, though, the heart of Africa, right? The very heart of the continent, 79% were born outside. Places like France and Belgium. Algeria, Senegal, and Morocco, mostly French, at 50%. Put another way, another graphic I looked at, by place of origin, by birthplace. In fact, I think I had it pulled up on my phone. Let me see if I can find it on my phone real quick. The birthplace of the most, number 1 place where people were born is Paris. Listen to this. You want to know how many of these players were born in Paris who were at the tournament? 107. You know what the next place is? Ivory Coast at 29. That is how much. That is almost like 4 times the second placed nation in terms of where they were born, right? So the most people at the tournament were born in Paris, 107. Oh, and to add to that too, it's not the only non-African country that is on this list. 24 were born in Spain, which means Spain would be also at, if Spain was an African nation, it would be in the top 5 of where the people came from. So that was my number 6 point. I just think it's very interesting for its implications of what of the geopolitical trends, which is to say that for a long time a team like France has been celebrated by some and criticized for some because a lot of its players are of African descent, but not of old-timey African descent, as of like recent African descent. Some of them have been were born in Africa and raised there. Some of them are second generation. So just to see that there's an opposite. The traffic is also flowing in the opposite direction, with the likes of Lucas Zidane playing for Algeria now when his father played for France. It's very interesting, right? Next point. Now we are into the loftier top 5. Number 5. This was, like I said, the 5 and the 5, those ones, the order, don't feel married to the order. The order can go either way. But I've put this one as number 5 because I feel that the other 3 or 4 build on each other. But also I've spoken about this before. It's the video I did, my previous video. So this number 5 story of Afcon is the Lumumba Vea guy. Michel Kunka Bolandinga, who, again, I've done a whole video on, so I'm going to go over this part really quickly. But he's a Congolese supporter who committed to standing tall and posing like the statue of revolutionary leader Patrice Lumumba. And he did that throughout the games continuously, and he did that over 3 games as they won. Then he did that for the whole 4th game, which was against Algeria, and he did that through to when they made it to extra time, and he stood like that until the 118th minute when they were finally knocked out by when Algeria scored, and at which point he finally sat down and he came down from where he stood. Very valiant, but that resulted in so many other things, right? It's so storied. Please watch the other video. Number 4, the hosting. Shout out to Morocco, and I must say this before we get to talking about the top 3 moments I have here. Shout out to Morocco. From a purely footballing perspective, Afcon 2025 was arguably the best organized Afcon in recent memory, if not ever. As a viewer, right, just watching it, the pitches were wonderful, playing surfaces, aesthetic marvels. Inside, comments from the players and officials, for the most part, praised the organization of the tournament. The people here operated at a very high level in terms of order and security. I have never taken part in an African competition organized at this level. That's what Mo Salah was saying in a post-match conference. Morocco also, this shouldn't be a surprise. And I'm quoting here from OK Africa. Also included by other sources in here. This part I'm quoting from OK Africa. Morocco has spent the better part of the last decade setting itself up as a powerhouse in African football, both on and off the pitch. You all saw that they made it to they made it to the semifinals of the World Cup a couple years ago, the first African nation to do so. Their kids, I think they just won a junior World Cup. Their women are also doing very well. They were runners-up in the last tournament, and they will be hosting the Women's African Cup of Nations and using the Afcon as a dress rehearsal for when they will co-host the World Cup in 2030. Good. Number 3. Well, now we complicate the narrative a little bit after the plot is to Morocco. As incredible as the hosting was, it was tainted by the barrage, I say, of criticism surrounding the quality of refereeing and fair play just throughout the tournament. For example, in Morocco's 2-0 quarterfinal win over Cameroon, officials declined a penalty appeal for Cameroon over a challenge on Brian Belmo of Manchester United, leading to public frustration and calls for VAR to review this, which never came. The match had already been preceded by controversy over the appointment of the referee. According to Sports News Africa, the Royal Moroccan Football Federation requested CAF replace the originally designated referee, Egyptian official Amin Omar. So that adds another layer to that rivalry thing I spoke about at the beginning, because this is a North African rivalry. CAF is reported to have accepted the request, with Mauritanian referee Dahane Baida ultimately officiating. Right? Moroccan coach Walid Regragui has angrily rejected suggestions that his team is benefiting from favorable refereeing decisions, as the tournament went on as the host. We're the team to beat. Now, you are saying this was ahead of the Cameroon game, which is what we're talking about. We're the team to beat. As the team to beat, people will try to find all sorts of reasons to say Morocco has an advantage. The only advantage Morocco has at this Africa Cup is playing in front of 65,000 spectators. The rest is on the field. We speak on the field. On the field, however, Cameroon would have had two penalties if the referee had decided against it. It's not just Morocco, though. This is not just home ground advantage. The day after their elimination in the quarterfinal against Nigeria, the Algerian Football Federation, FAF, filed an official complaint with CAF, and at the heart of this dispute was the performance of Senegalese referee Issa Sai, deemed partial by Algerian authorities. So now the Senegalese ref is being deemed partial by the Algerian authorities. The Algerian authorities went as far as to say this: the Algerian Federation cannot ignore the refereeing performance observed during the last match, which raised numerous questions and caused considerable confusion. Certain decisions have damaged the credibility of African refereeing and do nothing to enhance the value of continental football on the international stage. So that's what the Algerian Football Federation was saying after their quarterfinal match against Morocco, which I will talk about again in number 2. Nigeria said to have benefited from that, right? But they were also the loudest critics following their semi-final defeat to host Morocco, now echoing Cameroon's own complaints, right? One thing, this is Bright Osai Samuel, Nigerian defender. One thing I would say is that the referee was appalling. I'm not saying that's the reason why we lost, but just making very, very wrong decisions. It's really painful to see that we have referees like that in the big game like today. Osimhen similarly was not impressed, saying after the loss, "To be honest with you, today's game was nothing to write home about in terms of officiating. It was that bad. Me and my teammates, we are all professional, but it's disappointing. It's hurting because now we have to wait for more years to qualify again for the Afcon and try to prove a point." None of this, of course, happened in isolation, Even a day before the final, the Senegalese Football Federation had issued a detailed statement, strongly worded statement, accusing Morocco of deliberate attempts to undermine Senegal's preparations. So now we are moving away just from the refereeing itself to other unfairness. We'll talk about the perceived refereeing unfairness of the final a bit later. But here we're talking about these other complaints about the hosting itself, that even though it was fantastic, there were still attempts to undermine the preparations of the opposition. So what Senegal is accusing Morocco of doing was they included inadequate security on arrival at Rabat railway station, forcing the delegation into unsafe proximity with crowds, the Senegalese. They detailed accommodation issues as well that were only resolved after a formal protest. They also raised serious concerns about being directed to train at Morocco's own base, the Mohammed VI complex, a move that the Senegalese Federation rightly rejected on grounds of sporting fairness. Another thing that also came up was the ticket arrangements further tilted the scales, with Senegal receiving fewer than 3,000 tickets in a 53,000 capacity stadium, something that had been Morocco had been accused of doing even in earlier games, where games were said to be sold out, especially Moroccan games, but then you would see several seats still available, particularly in the visitors' arena. So some folks came out and popped up about that, but Senegal was the loudest in this regard. Indeed. So there's a lot of fair play complaints as well that we are seeing here, and that sort of dampened the mood of the tournament. Number two, which is tied somewhat to these things, as I stated, is there. I hate that this has to come up at all, especially if we're talking about the most beautiful game in the world, was the row around racism, which always shows up. Now, racial discourse surrounding the schism between North African nations, which tend to be mostly Arabic and some Berber and so forth, and the sub-Saharan Africans, is not new. Now, I want to make sure that I don't paint everybody, so I'm going to do it in a sandwich sort of way. So to say that you can see when Morocco made it to the semifinals of the World Cup, initially early on, there was a comment that Walid Regragui, the coach, had said, which said, we're doing this for the Muslim and the Arab world, and the Africans were like, oh, really? Not love for us? But later on, when they made it to the semifinals, he was quick to declare that Africa deserves to be here, right? We made it to the semifinals as a way to assert that Africa is not just some pariah, it deserves to be here. So that was nice to hear. Indeed. Later on, he was asked in a different tournament, this time African Cup of Nations, somebody asked him after the Congo DRC had knocked out Egypt, how he felt about the fact that Egypt at the time was the last remaining North African nation there. And his response said, it's not something that interests me. I'm not going to express myself in Arabic because my Arabic, I just don't want to be misinterpreted, right? He continued. Everyone has their way. Of course, they are our brothers, the Egyptians, and we are disappointed about their defeat, but we are also happy for DR Congo. So you can see here that he's doing his best to not be partisan, as if to say that they are allied. And to be fair, just to expect that a Moroccan guy would be supporting an Egyptian guy, when you saw that Morocco actually pushed to change the ref, the Egyptian referee, so as I was talking about earlier from the game against from their quarterfinal match against Cameroon, we also saw here, right, that Algerians were very much celebrating Morocco's defeat against Senegal. So just the assumption that all North African nations are in cahoots here seems a bit foolhardy when you look at it that way. But there's definitely, it's not a baseless claim, but it's complicated, as you can see it. But for all this, because some ugly moments have surfaced. For example, in that match we were talking about, the quarterfinal match between Algeria and Nigeria, which, like we spoke about in the honorable mentions, is becoming a fast rivalry. We spoke about it in terms of the fairness. But yeah, also one of the uglier moments, several ugly moments. One of them was ahead of that match after Algeria had defeated DRC, which again, Algeria is already not looking great because of that Lumumba Vea moment in which Mohamed Amoura of Algeria seemed to mock him. He ended up apologizing and so forth, but it had been in bad taste, particularly to a prominent sub-Saharan African leader. But in this game now, they seem to be chanting after they defeated the DRC, the fans, a chant that translates to bring back the slaves to serve Algeria, right? Reportedly including officials and journalists during a celebratory gathering in the hotel after Algeria's win over DRC, just prior to their match against Nigeria. Then during their match against Nigeria, a banana was thrown from the crowd onto the pitch where Nigeria's goalie Stanley Nwabali was playing. He picked it up. These are tones that are used. I've seen them a lot in places like Italy and Spain, with the likes of Vinicius Jr., Dani Alves, Samuel Eto'o being subject to these things, even Victor Osimhen. Nwabali picked up the banana and ate it, a moment that went viral as a statement of quiet defiance against something that I've seen Dani Alves do in the past and Neymar. You wish it never had to happen. Of course, it's defiance, and we love to see anytime people are defiant to this nonsense, but it shouldn't be happening at all. In the final, which I will talk about more, if you haven't figured this out, that's our number one, I guess, the spoilers. But there were also several racist things that happened during the game that were, reactions, especially after the match, right? Reactions after the match. And I'm not just saying this, right, because of how ugly the final got at certain parts. And I'll talk about the beauty and ugliness of it in a little bit. But really, the Moroccan Association of Human Rights themselves came out and said it had noticed a serious and worrying resurgence of hate speech and racist practices following the final. King Mohammed VI himself took the unusual step of urging calm, and nothing can undermine the closeness nurtured over centuries between our African peoples, nor the African cooperation built with the various countries of the continent. He said, Morocco is still and will remain faithful to the spirit of fraternity, solidarity, and respect it has always upheld towards its country. The king had to come out and say something, right? And why is the king coming out and saying something? Well, because of things like this. Tiki Tariq, a Moroccan influencer, soon after the match, had posted things like this. I hope we never competed. This monkey cup, full of stupid. Then he uses the R word, right? Then in another tweet he goes, I hope Morocco never plays in this shit continent. Effing filthy people scum. They can all F themselves, right? To which point somebody responds here, Cyrus responds, Timu European. You don't even identify yourself as Africans but want to win African Cup. Transgender nation, relocate to Europe. So again, also, we can see now how hate begets hate. Because now you have this guy Cyrus who's matching the energy. And it's not, these are not great things to say, right? But he's responding to something else. So indeed. So just ugly to see. We hate to see it, especially given Morocco's role in Pan-Africanism, that a lot of times this sub-Saharan and North African binary is manufactured. Sure, there's cultural differences, and there's the proximity of North Africa to other Middle Eastern places which occupy Europe and Asia. But in many ways, this brotherhood, like the king was saying, has been fostered. In fact, when Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was pushing for the unity of Africa as a whole into one big country in the late 50s and 1960s, and there was pushback. The meeting for the group that was more gung-ho, that was more willing to move towards the project, is known as the Casablanca Bloc, because that's where that meeting was held. People like Abdel Nasser of Egypt and, dare I say, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya are some of the biggest proponents of Pan-Africanism in the modern era. So there's a lot of nuances here. And number one, it can only be one thing, and it's something that I've already mentioned. The final itself. Oh my God, what a final. Now, most finals tend to be pretty drab affairs. Most finals tend to be pretty, not most, but maybe 50-50. You would think that if a tournament has already selected the best teams in a space, say in the world or in Africa, in a space like that, and progressively the lesser of those pretty good teams have been eliminated. By the time we get to the final, we get the cream of the crop and we get this beautiful game. But not every game is like France versus Argentina in the World Cup final 2022, which was just incredible. Most games are more like Germany, Argentina 2014, So this one, for the first 90 minutes, it lives in both worlds. For the first 90 minutes or so, it looks like the 50% part that is really non-eventful. There were some events too that I'll talk about. But in the 98 minutes of normal time, with the score still 0-0, a VAR review flagged slight contact by Senegal's El Hadji Malick Diouf, baller. He's been showing out all tournament, right? Killing it. On Brahim Diaz of Morocco, baller, been killing it all tournament. In fact, he ended up being the top goal scorer of the tournament. He already had 5 goals at this point in the penalty box. And the Congolese referee Jean-Jacques Ndlala awarded a late penalty to hosts Morocco, right at the end of regulation. Senegal were very upset, not just because this was a soft penalty, but because minutes earlier a Senegal goal had been disallowed. And they felt the referee should have reviewed that one instead. Right? So this is what's going on. This is the conflict right here. And the controversy starts right here. Pape Thiaw, the Senegalese coach, eventually ends up calling his players to leave. We're not going to stand for this BS. He calls them off. They all leave the pitch, which you never see this happen. They went to the locker room, which some Moroccans are now arguing that's grounds to forfeit the game once you leave the field. They all leave the field. Oh, this is drama right here. This is drama. Moroccans are on the field while Wahid Regragui, the coach of Morocco, is going crazy. There's a lot of scuffling around. You see people pop up. El Hadji Diouf, not El Hadji Malik Diouf, who's playing, but the legendary Senegalese player from the early 2000s, star of the 2002 World Cup, Coles is on the phone. He's seen on the phone, frantic. Now, apparently, he was talking to authorities and some of the team players trying to get them to come back. Fascinating. But somebody else who popped up and really showed out here, because remember, the coaches already said they can go, was Sadio Mane. Sadio Mane, their talisman, their best player, and for a long time, one of the best, probably the greatest player in Senegalese history, especially after this tournament. But for a long time, was actually a contender for the Ballon d'Or. He's getting up there in age now. He's playing in Saudi Arabia. He's not the captain. The captain is actually Kalidou Koulibaly, who was suspended for the final. And in his place, it's not even Sadio Mane who picks that up. It's Pape Gueye, who I'll talk about shortly here. But the disgrace went far beyond the referee. Inside the stadium, scenes unfolded that had no place in the continental final, right? And I'm quoting here from a newspaper called the Nile Post. Hakimi was caught on camera removing and throwing away Edouard Mendy's... Hakimi, again, arguably the best right back in the world right now, throwing Edouard Mendy's towel behind the goal, deliberately interfering with the goalkeeper's ability to dry his gloves in the pouring rain. Then the Morocco ball boys and team staffers started to take away towels from Senegalese players, something that they had done with Nouabali as well in the previous round, which is why another thing that points to the fair play issues. Then the most shocking thing I've ever seen, at that point, right, the Senegalese realized what's going on. They sent their reserve goalkeeper, Yevan Diouf, to go stand by the goal, right behind Edouard Mendy was keeping goal. He goes behind there, sort of to protect the towels. This is a professional player who plays for Nice in the French league. He plays for one of the in the top league for a top team in one of the top leagues in the world. He's over there, but now he's been reduced to protecting as a reserve goalkeeper towels. Oh, but that's not even the worst part of it. The ball boys stand toe to toe with him, and they are seen dragging him along the turf as he tried to protect a towel during active play while Morocco were attacking. Ball boys, come on, y'all. You mean to tell me ball boys should be so honored to even talk to the players at any level of the game, let alone at the highest level of the game like this. And they're dragging him along the turf? Other Moroccan players physically blocked Diouf from passing a towel to Mendy. All this happened in full view of the officials, and nobody was punished. This is crazy talk. This is crazy. In fact, some of the players, who was it, has gone on to apologize. And in fact, there's a point in which Mazraoui, one of the Moroccan players, was actively yelling at his teammates for that nonsense, right? So, crazy. But anyway, that had happened during the game. Then that awkward moment at the end at which a goal had been disallowed, first a Senegalese goal. Now, I'll be honest and say that neither of those decisions look individually egregious, But the fact that they happened back to back, like, they could have gone either way. But the fact that they happened back to back and they both favor Morocco, given how the game had been going with this Ottawa nonsense, the Senegalese were fed up, so they decided to leave. In fact, Pape Thiaw, later the coach of Senegal, who's since apologized and is facing disciplinary action, apologized and said, I wanted to protect my players from an injustice. That's how he's argued it. Sadio Mane, who was on the phone and he got on the phone and he convinced his teammates to come back after 20 minutes. Think about that, in the final. After 20 minutes, they come back out. He convinced them, and when asked how that happened, he's like, the referee made a mistake. I don't think, everybody can make a mistake. I don't think he should be judged for that. Plus, also, I know the world was watching this game, and I just wanted the world to see the rest of this game. So they come back onto the pitch. Listen. Brahim Diaz, top goal scorer at this point, is tasked. He fights against El Nezeri, who's another crackpot striker from Morocco. And they decide Brahim Diaz, who's already on 5 goals, is going to take this penalty. And he takes a Panenka, soft Panenka. Edward Mendy, being the reaction goalkeeper that he is, catches it very easily, which led some people to argue that, to suggest that, maybe this was all part of the plan. They came back with the promise that he was going to miss the penalty on purpose, and you keep the peace. Which, if you see that, it looks like it could be a thing, just based on how it went, how weak the penalty was, and how, But think about what you're suggesting right now. You're suggesting that Morocco, who have been on a tear, right? Dozens of games undefeated at home at this point. Dozens of games undefeated at home at this point, right? Semi-finalists at the World Cup. Their junior team has just won the World Cup. Their women's team was losing finalists last time against Nigeria, and they will be hosting the tournament, the women's tournament, in a few months. And they're going to be hosting the World Cup in 2030. If they've already roughhoused, enough that they're ball boys pushing professional players around. And also because, like I said, these penalties, sure, they were back-to-back. I mean, the decisions were back-to-back, but they were not the most egregious things. Why would they just give up? And also, by the way, Morocco has not won this tournament since 1976. That's 50 years. 50 years. Zambia has won this tournament since then. South Africa was banned from international football when Morocco won the tournament for another 2 decades, and they came back and they've since won it, right? Cote d'Ivoire had not won their first one at that time. They've won 3 since then. Egypt had their neighbors. Egypt had a 3-peat from 2006 to 2010. You don't think they want this? Senegal has already won this in 2020, as recently as 2021. You think they don't want this? So I think the idea of it being the conspiracy about them missing on purpose is nonsense. But anyway, the game then, so after that, the game ends and it goes into extra time. Extra time began, still scoreless. And in the 112th minute, Pape Gueye, who is the captain on the day, right? Remember, it wasn't Sadio Mane, and Kalidou Koulibaly, the official captain, is suspended. Gueye comes in, right? Pape Gueye picks up a loose ball near the edge of the Moroccan penalty box. He moves, he dribbles past one defender, sends him to the floor. Sees that the goalkeeper is off his line. He hits it. Woo! Low. Precise shot right into the far corner. Take a breath, right? The shot then goes on to beat Moroccan keeper Bono, who is one of the GOATs right now. I'm seeing him even being put in the conversation of the greatest African goalkeepers of all time. I don't know if I would say all that he had given the likes of Thomas Nkone and Bruce Grobela. But in any case, he scores it in the 112th minute. The game holds. It ends that way. Oh my God. Senegal are the champions. And the world delights with them. Moroccans are very upset, but around the world, in Algeria, right, for all their problems with these other nations, celebrations are gone. Right? Algerians are celebrating. There's a watch party in New York City. I didn't even know New York City was the Senegalese were deep in New York like that. But celebrations in New York, not Mahmoud, that's his father. Zoran Mamdani was watching, had a watch party in New York City. The mayor, celebrations are gone. In Senegal, we won't even start to talk about it. In France, of course, where a lot of Senegalese people of Senegalese descent live, crazy celebrations. So what Like I said, Papi Thiaw eventually apologized, calling it a hit of the moment decision. Walid Regragui shamed the scenes as shameful and damaging to African football's image. Which, by the way, I do want to bring this up though. This I don't like. That to say, while I obviously don't buy into the schism of North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa as a Pan-Africanist myself. I noticed that in three times here, the North African nations have addressed a gripe as making African football look bad. Making African football look bad. In a way that posits that they are doing something different from the Sub-Saharan, as if they are, you other guys are embarrassing us, sort of thing, you know, like you Sub-Saharan Africans are embarrassing us. Maybe that's not the implication, but that's how it comes across here. Like we're saying, you know, with Walid Regragui saying this, and earlier on I was talking about Algerian Football Federation. Certain decisions have damaged the credibility of African refereeing. Like, yo, you know, we have our problems, right? But for you to keep talking about it as if it's like African refereeing, like when that happens in other regions, they debate about that particular performance and how it can be better, not as a way to say like, Africa sucks because of this thing, right? So I'm noticing a higher volume of that here in ways that I'm not very happy about. But in any case, these were the conversations that happened. The fallout is still ongoing right now. But the tournament itself, incredible. You know, some people remember it for the chaos and controversy. Anybody who's talking about this tournament being a disgrace is being disingenuous, or they wanted to say that anyway in the first place. This has been a fantastic tournament. The drama, sure, charge that to the game. That's a bit of the passion. This is Africa, baby, you know, so every now and then things like that will happen. But yeah, that was the amazing African Cup of Nations, the 35th edition. Shout out to Morocco, the good, the bad. Shout out to Senegal. Shout out to Lumumba Vea. Shout out to Young Maswani out of Zimbabwe. You know, next time you're taking us far, my guy. Indeed, and I'll catch you next time. One.